Well, thank you. I can tell by your entrance here and the response that you need an introduction. So let me just very briefly, Governor, say that we are so happy to have you here at the Chamber of Commerce. You can see that the business community is excited to hear from you directly. And if I could just take a moment before I turn the mic over, Governor, I've already introduced our elected officials, which I know that you have had a chance to meet before, but I do want to say that California is at a moment in time right now that we have some extreme issues to deal with, extreme. We have serious budget problems, we have health problems, we have transportation, we need to rebuild our infrastructure, and I have to say that if I could ever pick the perfect person to fill that moment, it's our government, or it's our governor. He wrote that wrong. It is our governor. And the reason is, for so long, we have really been more concerned about, is this a Republican issue, is it a Democrat issue? And that's not the case. All the issues I just mentioned are issues for California. So we have a governor that is probably the best advocate for California that I have had the privilege of knowing in the past 25 or 30 years. Governor, you do a great job. We appreciate you taking on the tough issues, especially the budget. We know the budget did not get into this mess in a short period of time, and it's going to take a while to get to resolve it. And I also have to say, we as individual business members and leaders have to stop being special interest groups. We have to start being advocate and special interest groups for California. And having said that, the pain will have to be shared by all as we look at this budget. And if there is a governor that can present that to us, it is this governor. And I look very forward to hearing his comments. But let me, if I could, have Mayor Reed come up and just say a couple of moments, and then we will turn it over to the governor.
Thank you, Pat. And Governor, thank you for coming to San Jose. We appreciate your interest in San Jose. Back in December, I was in Sacramento meeting with the governor as a part of a group of big city mayors. We talked about the budget crisis, the budget problems, and my measly little $25 million shortfall next year didn't seem so big compared to the $14 billion shortfall the state is facing. So I told the governor, as part of that conversation, he said that he thought this was an opportunity. Yes, it's a crisis, but it's also an opportunity to fix the California broken budget system once and for all. I told the governor that if he could do that, that would be the biggest thing he's ever done. And his response was, "It's a done deal." Governor, thanks for coming.
Thank you. Well, first of all, let me just say thank you, Pat, for the wonderful comments that you made, and you have been a big supporter. Of course, you have worked in my administration, so I expect nothing less. Now, we have been really great, so thank you very much also for helping us get this group together here, so we really appreciate it. I want to thank also the San Jose and Silicon Valley Chamber of Commerce and all the people that are here today. Appreciate that. I want to thank Mayor Reed for his great leadership and moving the city forward, and also being a great partner to the state of California. Thank you very much. And of course, we have also Mike Ginest. Where's Mike Ginest? Right over here, our finance director. Now, he's very important because, as you know, that if there's anything in the budget you don't like, that is his fault. And everything that is good about the budget is me. Okay, so I just want to make sure that you understand that. So I love taking him with me up and down the state. So when people go and complain and says, "How could you take so much money out of this program?" I said, "Mike, you better answer that." I said, "It's your fault." But anyway, the bottom line is that we have been having actually a very interesting and enjoyable time in the way of traveling up and down the state, which we always do. Not because of the budget situation, but we always do this after the State of the State address and after the budget presentation, because it's important to go and explain your policies and the changes that we want to make and the things that we want to accomplish here in the state of California this year. So this is why January is always important. This is when we do the presentation and then we go up and down the state and talk to the people directly. Now, why do I personally believe that's important? This is because I think that the people are the most important thing in all this. It's not me, it's not the legislators, it's the people. Because without the people, we cannot get any of this done. The people have been from the beginning, from first day I came into office, were my partners, the true partners. And the reason why we have accomplished so much in this state in these last 4 years was because of the people's support. So this is why it is very important, again, that we all work together this year again. Democrats and Republicans, I would never single out anyone because, as you've heard Pat say earlier, there's times for doing politics, but there's times also to be a public servant and not a party servant. It's a big mistake that if you do this position, if you're an elected official, you become a party servant, because then you're only representing part of the population. I want to represent all of the people in California, and that's the bottom line. And I think that's why we have accomplished so much. I think that you all know where we started 4 years ago when I came into office. I mean, we had a state that was almost bankrupt. We did not know how to make our payments, and people were screaming that we should raise taxes. And then, of course, when I say people in Sacramento, the legislators, we should raise taxes. And, of course, they did raise the taxes. And what happened? There was a revolt in California. There was a recall because of that. So this is the last thing we want to do, and this is, again, the case this time, because every time we have a problem with the budget, and you can see here, this is why we have those charts here, you can see that there's bumps in the road with the budget all the time, where the yellow line, which is the spending line, goes out of whack and goes right past the revenue line. And so if we each time raise taxes, we would be right now at 100% taxes, because you can't every time you have a budget problem raise taxes. That's not the answer. The answer is to fix the system itself that creates this kind of a situation where you have the spending line be out of control and be not tied together at all to the revenue line. Now here we have, for instance, something that I had Mike Ginesse put together. If we would have the budget reforms that I'm proposing here in my budget and in my speech, I proposed it. If we have that in place for the last 10 years, these lines will be together, and we would not have the problem right now. So this is why it is extremely important that we reform the system. But what we have done is, in the last 4 years when I came into office, was actually rebuild the economy and rebuild confidence again and bring Democrats and Republicans together. And because of that, we were able to reform workers' compensation. And I'm mentioning those things because it can show you the opposite of raising taxes. What we did was, with workers' compensation reform, we lowered the workers' comp costs by 63%, and that puts $14 billion back into the private sector. Then the other thing that we have done, which I think was extremely important, is rescind the car tax, because I promised that when I ran the first time for office that I would rescind the car tax. That meant that we are giving back $4 billion a year, between $4 and $6 billion, because now it's $6 billion, correct? For $6 billion. So that means altogether in the last 4 years we have given back $20 billion to the people of California. So you take the $14 billion with workers' comp and the $20 billion, you have $34 billion that went back to the people of California. Now, isn't that quite different than raising taxes and taking money from you? See, it's a whole different program. This administration believes that the money should go to you because you know how to spend it better than we do. That is, there's no two ways about it. Sacramento should learn how to live within its means. We have plenty of revenues. Revenues are continuously going up. As you can see in this chart here, our revenues continuously go up and up and up and up. All we have to do is to reform the system so that when we have peaks in our revenues, that we take some of that money and put it in the rainy day fund, which I proposed, so that when there's a downturn, we now have money available for those downturns. And then you add to that the system that they're using in Arkansas and in other states, may I remind you, and that is where the legislators have already predetermined which programs will get cut if there is a downturn. So if they run out of that rainy day fund, there's no more money available, and there's a downturn, which programs do we cut? Rather than what we have to do now, we have to sit down now for the next 14 days and debate over this. In these 14 days, there will be no other business done except the budget. That I know for sure, because everyone will be consumed with that. And sometimes in the summer when we do the budget in Sacramento, those periods get extended by 2-3 months. Now you have 2 or 3 months where nothing else gets done except budget discussions. Now we could eliminate all of that by predetermining which programs will be cut if we are short of revenues. And then we can go on and do very serious business talking about infrastructure and healthcare reform and education reform, rather than sitting there and talking for 3 months about the budget. So we want to make those changes, and that will then bring consistency into the whole thing. Of course, all of this is not that easy. because there's people that have tried this in the past. We have tried it. When I came into office in the beginning, the first month when I was in office, we already had a vote. The legislators voted it down, our budget reforms, because we wanted to go and create a rainy day fund. We wanted to create a system that is coherent, but the legislators didn't like it. So let's assume for a second I approached it the wrong way. Maybe I was not inclusive enough. Maybe I was not experienced enough. I give them the benefit of the doubt. Then I went back to the people. And I asked them in 2005 at a special election, I said, we need to have a budget system that works. And that was not approved. That didn't work. It failed. So now it's the third time that we're going back and we're trying to do that. But I mean, we have to go and fix this budget system once and for all. If we don't, here is a chart that shows to you what will happen. See, as you can see, we are now apart right here in the first year by almost $6 billion. It would then widen. So that means that the spending will increase and the revenues are much more flat. So there's $10 billion difference between the two lines every single year. We cannot afford that because they will bankrupt the state of California and we will get a bad credit rating which costs us hundreds of thousands of dollars extra. So this is why it is hundreds of millions of dollars extra. This is why it is very important that we fix the system. Here's a chart that shows to you what will happen if we fix the system right now. It will bring the two lines together, the spending line and the revenue line. So this is why I came here to talk to you about that, about our budget problem. And what is very important here is, because there's some people that think that because we have this budget problem, that we should stop all of our investment in the future of California. They want to stop with healthcare reform. They want to stop with our investing in infrastructure and all of those things. But we should never make that mistake, because let me tell you, this here is a bump in the road. This is temporary, this budget problem. It's temporary. If we fix it, we will continue on to great success and we will keep that line straight all the way and we will increase our revenues all the time, every year, and so on. But if we don't invest in the future, people will feel this in 10 years from now, in 20 years from now. This is why in my State of the State I mentioned the example of FDR. Because Franklin Roosevelt was not just waiting for the economy to get better. There was a big depression, major problem. But he went out and he started building. He started investing in America. Started building 125,000 buildings, 78,000 bridges, 650,000 miles of roads he was building during that time. And that's what put people back to work. And this is what created, again, revenues, and the economy got stimulated. We got to go and think about our future. It would be a big mistake to stop those projects. And people sometimes get confused to say, well, how could we do healthcare reform right now when we are making cuts in healthcare? Well, the two have nothing to do with each other, because the fact of the matter is, if we do healthcare reform, we would then finally have emergency rooms that would be just for emergency. We would then finally have our emergency rooms stay open rather than closing. Like in the last 10 years, we had 60 emergency rooms closed, and hospitals are getting stuck with unpaid bills. Medi-Cal patients are not being accepted by all the doctors because we're not reimbursing them the right amount of money. We are now, with healthcare reform, putting $4 billion into Medi-Cal. So there's all kinds of great things. And finally, everyone will be insured, and that the insurance companies will not be able to cancel anyone when they have maybe cancer or some serious illness, which is happening right now. That's why I used that example in my State of the State, where now healthcare companies, insurers, they're canceling people's policies when they have a problem, or they don't accept someone because of age or because of a medical history. All of those things will go away. So those are programs that will be everlasting. So this is why we have to continue on and work on those programs, rebuild California, take care of our water. This is what we're fighting for right now, is water. Because we don't have, I cannot look at the people and say that we will have in the future enough water in this state. We have a water system right now that is for 18 million people, but not for 37 million people, and definitely not for 50 million people, because if we now agree on a water system to rebuild our water system and to create more above the ground and below the ground water storage, and if we fix the delta and fix its ecosystem and build more water delivery systems and all of those things, it would take 15 to 20 years to build all of this. By that time, we will be 50 million people. So we have to build a water system that's leased for 50 million people to make sure that we can promise you that, yes, 10, 20, 50 years from now, when you turn on the faucet, there will be enough water coming out. Or when the farmers want to irrigate their land, that there is enough water coming out. So this is why we got to continue with all of those programs rather than saying, oh, my God, we have a budget crisis, let's stop everything. Big mistake. It's short-sightedness. So this is why, again, I need each and every one of your help to go, and when I say help, is to call your legislators and to tell them, don't raise my taxes. That's the easy way out. Get disciplined. The state needs to be in a situation where you only spend what you have. That's what I have to do, you tell them. That's what I have to do in my business. I can only spend what I have. I cannot live beyond my means. That's what we have to do. That's my responsibility also in the family. Every one of you has this responsibility to live within your means. And that's also the state's responsibility, to live within the means rather than each time we have a problem to raise your taxes. And they get very creative sometimes in Sacramento when it comes to raising taxes. So this is why I want to just warn you of that, and let's work together on this, all of you. Now, if you have any questions about any of this, please feel free, because that's why I'm going around the state to answer questions if you have any questions about this. Yes, please.
Let me turn so you can all hear as well.
Give me my mic.
I'm Leslie. I'm a Santa Clara County Supervisor. I'm particularly interested in prevention, particularly interested in an area you are interested in, which is health. Good health, but I'm very interested in prevention. I'm very concerned about call it as it is, an obese population, a true problem with something that exists that I think is controllable. You've concentrated on that in your administration. Could you say more about what we could do at the state level as far as improving our entire health? We need health care reform, but how about preventive health reform as well?
Well, let me first just say that you hit the nail on the head, because you did. Because the major problem with our system is that they do not pay, when you have an insurance, they do not pay for anything that has to do with prevention. Or very rarely, I should say, do they pay for anything or give you incentives. I mean, I think that we have seen Steve Bird, who is, the head of Safeway, has shown us, charts, endless amount of charts where he has shown that the more he has included prevention, the more his healthcare costs went down. So whereas everyone else in the state experiences double-digit increases, sometimes 20 to 25% increases in healthcare costs, companies, various different companies, he has seen a decline of 13% of his healthcare costs because he gives incentives, and prevention is a big part of that. If you go to people and you say, if you don't smoke, if you lower your cholesterol level, if you lower your body weight, if you exercise every day, we're going to give you a reduction of the costs. Immediately you have people inspired and they get going with it, and that's what happened with him. That's why there's a decline. Also, if you go right now and you say to your insurance company, I want to go and get a body scan, I want to see if there's maybe some cancer developing in the body. They say, well, we're not going to pay for that. I mean, think about that. How crazy is that? We should be paying for those kind of things. Also, when it comes to lifestyle, which is what you also touched on, people get overweight. Well, that's why we in our state, we're the first state where we banned junk food from the vending machines in our public schools, and we banned also sodas. Because we want to let the children know, if you want to drink milk or drink water, but you don't need the sodas. Because that will create diabetes, and there's people dying from all of those things. So too much of any of this thing is really bad. And it's sending also the wrong message. That's why we also included hundreds of millions of dollars in our education fund in order to create more physical education teachers, to have, again, regular physical education classes, which was discontinued almost in most of the schools in the early 90s. So there's all kinds of things. We have healthier lunch programs now and put money towards that. So there's all kinds of programs that we are doing now that will help kids to get healthier and to get off this junk food and the sodas and all of those things, which will help them later on. Okay? Yes, please.
Governor, as an environmental leader and a fiscal pragmatist, have you ever considered lowering personal income tax for the residents of California, and by offsetting that loss, raising taxes on gas, dissuading a behavior that we don't want to continue for the environmental reasons?
Well, believe me, first of all, I can tell you, I've thought about 1,000 different things, okay? But it doesn't mean that every time you think about those things, you do it, because then you go out and you test it and you include other people, and those things are always met with tremendous resistance when you say, let's raise the tax on gasoline, because people, for instance, have such a difficult time already when you have almost now with the barrel of oil being at $100 and the gallon of gasoline now is at $3.50. They say it will go to $4. And so that is really burdensome for a lot of people, because not too long ago it was at $2. So now that makes people barely can afford to pay for the gas to go to work. So now you slap on a tax, you're really going to punish people again, and this is why I think there's a tremendous resistance on that. I know your idea, what you're talking about, it discouraged people from driving that much in orders, but there's a lot of the critics would say that it would discourage the people that have less income, that have less money. Those are the ones that would not be able then to drive, and those that have the money, like myself, no matter how much the gallon of gasoline costs, I will still be driving, and the CHPs will still be driving me around in order. So there will be no slowdown there. So you know what I'm saying? So it will really hit maybe the wrong people, and that's what we're worried about. So we have to come up with a different way of discouraging people from driving as much, number one. And second of all, I am, of course, a big believer when it comes to all of this, to cleaning our environment, is all about one thing, and this is technology. We got to force the car manufacturers, the car companies, into making cars that are running on electric power and on biofuel and those kind of alternative fuels rather than fossil fuel, which is a huge polluter. And there is tremendous resistance amongst the car companies in America. Now there's so much pressure from other companies from overseas that they're bringing in now all these great vehicles with alternative fuel and all this. We've seen it in the latest car show again, that puts the pressure on Detroit. And I'm sorry to say that the administration in Washington has failed terribly when it comes to really creating great leadership in that direction. Okay, absolutely. Yes, please.
One of the issues on which you've shown the greatest interest is education, and yet today the educators are showing great angst about your budget. Can you say something to reassure them?
Yes. Anyone that is in the education community, if it's teachers, administrators, school principals, union leaders, they should be interested in one thing, and that is to create stability for our children. We all, my administration, the legislators, and everyone that's interested in education ought to fight for that we bring our lines together. As you can see, we have continuous increase in revenues. They always go up. What we have to get rid of is the bumps, the ups and downs. One year when, for instance, in 1999, when our revenue skyrocketed by 23%, all of a sudden everyone was so enthusiastic and said, isn't that great? Now we can go and spend the money on education and on the social programs and on health care and the healthy family programs and all of those things. And people were really excited about it, and there was happiness. The next year the revenues went down, all the money was spent, and there was no money left for anything. And now the kids all of a sudden see a decline in education funding. And this happens over and over again. Now we have Prop 98 in order to protect children from that. But in the meantime, when there's a decline of revenues, you can't protect anyone from it, except if you borrow for those ongoing programs. And we can't do that anymore because we've taken those things away. Luckily, we have taken the ability of borrowing for ongoing programs away. Because it is not fair to do that, to have the future pay for those things. What we have to do is we have to create a system where the kids don't have to suffer when we suspend Proposition 98. So what happens is you have an increase in revenues, you spend it all, the baseline goes up, and then all of a sudden the revenues come down. Now you have to suspend Prop 98. So where is there the stability in education? There is no stability. What we have to do is we have to go and create a stability through reform of the budget system. That's how we create stability. Not only for the children, which are the most important, but also for vulnerable citizens, for elderly citizens. There are so many people that rely on this money, on getting that money steadily, and not go through these ups and downs. So this is why it is absolutely important to do that. And may I remind you, when I came into office, the government literally took money from various different areas when they fell short on revenues. First of all, they would raise the taxes, which they did with the car tax. Then this was not enough, so they grabbed money from the pension funds. Then they grabbed money from local governments, as you remember. And also then they grabbed money from transportation, which was tax money that is meant for transportation projects. They took that money too. So now they robbed everybody. So now when we came into office, we now started paying back. Every year we started paying back transportation, local government, the pension funds, all of those things we started paying back. But at the same time what we did was we went out and we passed initiatives. Like for instance Proposition 1A, to protect local government. Remember how we all fought together? Democrats and Republicans went out there and told the people vote yes on Proposition 1A, and it won with 82% of the votes, to protect once and for all local government so the state, Sacramento, can go and grab that money. And the same we did with transportation money. Through Proposition 42, we protected that. So this is what we did. We tightened the noose so that the politicians cannot go out and take that money ever again. So now, this year, they have to deal with reality. We are now, this current fiscal year, 2007-2008, we are short of our projected revenues by $4.6 billion. That will put us in a hole this current year by $3.3 billion. That's the situation that we're in right now in this fiscal year. So when you hear the press talk about that we have a deficit of $14.5 billion, you should know it's wrong. Because we are not $14.5 billion in the hole, we are $3.3 billion in the hole. If we don't do anything, and if the legislators in Sacramento sit on their hands and decide for the next year and a half not to do anything on budget, then we potentially could be at $14.5 billion deficit. So you should know that's by June of 2009. Right now, the state of California does not have a deficit of $14.5 billion. It's $3.3 billion we're in the hole. Yes, please.
Governor Jim Canine, I served 6 years on the State Assembly Budget Committee back in the 90s, and if we had had this reform in place, the state would be much better off, so I heartily endorse it. You just raised a great point, though, and it gets to the heart of my question, which is we can bring up all of these individual issues, and we're all passionate about these individual issues, but, while the budget is so much of it is on autopilot, people are also making decisions up there. And not always do our 120 legislators have all the right motivations right now in this era of term limits. So I wanted to get a sense from you on some of the other reforms that need to be complementary to this budget reform, most particularly term limits.
Well, term limit in a way has something to do with the budget issue. You're absolutely correct. And the reason is because I personally feel, first you should know, when I campaigned in 2003, I made it very clear that I don't like at all that politicians stay too long in Sacramento. Let's get them out of there. So I was all for term limits. But now, having worked there for 4 years, I have seen, my term doesn't get extended with term limits, as you know, I'm not part of that. For some reason, I forgot to include the governor. But the bottom line is that I found out when you negotiate and when you sit down and you try to work on really complicated issues, that the special interests and the lobbyists are in most cases smarter than the politicians, because they've been in Sacramento now for 20, 30 years. Our guys are supposed to be only in one area thing for 6 years in the Assembly and in the Senate, a certain amount of years, and then you have to leave. You have to just discontinue maybe the great job that you've done. So I think it is a disadvantage to Sacramento and it's a disadvantage to California having those term limits. Now, that doesn't mean we should throw it out. Not at all. What we should do is we should do like we have done with many, many legislation, where we look at after we pass legislation, 2, 3 years later we realize that there ought to be some tweaks to be made to the legislation. We should adjust it and perfect it. And that's what I'm saying we should do with term limits. Let's go and let's have these guys in there another few years so that we have them gain more experience and so they can really, truly represent the people of California rather than have the special interests and the lobbyists be the representative. And they're only, of course, looking at their best interest, what is best for their interests. So I think that the term limits is why I came out today and wrote an op-ed piece in the LA Times to endorse Proposition 93 is because I want those legislators that I'm working with and that we have created such a good relationship with, I want them to stay a few more years, at least while I'm there, so that we can go and be successful for the state of California and for the people of California. And I'm talking now about Democrats and Republicans. So that's why.
We may have time, I'm told, for one, maybe two more questions. Please. And I think Mr. Williams had his hand up, and then maybe we can get back.
Governor, you've been a great supporter for public transportation. And as you know, with the global warming and our energy efforts, our Green Vision plan to reduce the carbon footprint, and transportation will play a key role in our efforts to do this. There are several projects that are crucial for this area. One is BART and, of course, high-speed rail. And I would just like to have you comment on where you are with that and what we can do to help move that along. Thank you.
Well, first of all, I'm a big believer in public transportation. Mass transit, I think it's extremely important because we got to give people a chance to go and use that so they don't have to jump into their car and use the car and then, of course, use a lot of gas and pollute the world and all this. I try to do everything we can, even in the last negotiations when we negotiated for our infrastructure bonds, the $37 billion that the people approved in November of 2006. A big part of that was public transportation. Now, when you talk about the high-speed rail, I'm all for that. And the key thing is that we go and use public-private partnerships. And that's why I've used that term several times during my State of the State speech, because I think that we need to invest in the future of California. We need to invest at least $500 billion. And I want to repeat it again, $500 billion we need to invest in the next 20 years in order to get up to speed, because you've got to recognize the fact that in the last 4 decades, California did not build with the speed of our increase in population. We have a water system that is for 18 million people. We have a transportation system that is for 20 million people. Our levees have not been fixed for decades, and we knew that they were vulnerable levees. All of those things were not in classrooms. Kids are still in classrooms where there's 30 kids in the classroom rather than reducing the size of the classroom. And all of those things ought to be fixed, and we need this kind of money. The transportation system alone, the reason why people get stuck in traffic is because we haven't done the building that we need for the increase in population. So this is why mass transit, if it is high-speed rail, if it is more freeways, more tunnels, more bridges, more on-ramps and more off-ramps, and more classrooms, and expanding the universities and doing all of this is absolutely essential. We are a state that is falling behind. We are going way ahead in so many things, and we are number one in the world in so many things. But when it comes to infrastructure, we have fallen way behind. And economic power is how fast you move people and goods around in the state or in the country. That is economic power. So right now we have a major problem, how long it takes us to move people and goods around. And this is why we have to really step it up in all of those areas. And that's why you will see me introducing the water bonds and introducing more education bonds and building more classrooms, expanding our universities, building more community colleges, building more career-tech educational facilities, and all of those things we got to build for this population and for the population that's to come. Okay? So again, I want to say thank you, all of you, for being here today. As I said, it's extremely important. Your voice is powerful. It's really powerful. So I want you to participate in this. I want you to push. I want you to work with us and to let the legislators know that they should go and act on our budget reform as quickly as possible, act on making the necessary cuts for this fiscal year and then the rest of the cuts for the coming fiscal year, and then to solve this problem once and for all so we can move forward and continue being the golden state that we are. Thank you very much, and I'll be back. Thank you. Thank you.